is Wilbur's favorite book of the Bible, Psalm. And exactly 2 weeks ago, the Lord impressed upon my heart for a Sunday just one word that I focused on, the word life. And I dealt with it that Sunday, and that was July 7th. Today we're at July 21st. And Psalm 90 says this. It says, Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hast formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. Just states it. God, you're God. And then it goes on later in the chapter. It says these words, so teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. And I want to look at that passage again, and those of you that were here have heard some of this before, but I felt like it's appropriate to go back and look at that, because 2 weeks ago, when we talked about numbering our days, we didn't know who needed to number them shorter. And we look at the contrast here between God, he's immovable, everlasting, here forever, and mankind, which we are only here for a limited time. And if you remember when we looked at that, we used 3 words. We talked about the dust. Man came from dust, and man will return to dust. Genesis chapter 3. We talked about the duration of our life, just like a memory, just like a night watch. I used the example several weeks ago of our life is like a soap bubble. It's here, it floats. We never know quite where it's going to go or how long it's going to last or what it'll bump into that will cause it to pop. Some will last longer than we ever imagined. Some will be cut shorter than we ever thought. But as we looked at that, we came up with this 3 words that I gave then, and I want to give them to you today. First of all, the word was right, W-R-I-T-E. We are to number our days, it says. Write them down. Write down our days. Number our days. Recognize the brevity of our life. Just a short time. We're not eternal like God. Our life ends. We don't have very long. Moses talked about in that Psalms about 70, maybe 80. I always thought Wilbur was 82 or 83. 78 in some cases. And a couple weeks ago I told the people that were there, I told them about how there was a man who sat down and counted out how many days he had left if he lived until 80. And I did the same. I wrote down, as of today, I've got, and I counted leap years in there because you got to count every day. Leap years, I have 15,003 days. But none of us imagined that Wilbur would have 10. Never crossed our minds. Never crossed them. So Moses says right now, think about how brief our life is. We have a short time. We don't know how long. None of us do. And then the second word was, it says, so teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Work. Work. Apply your life in work. Wilbur worked 33 years with the town. That field trip you went on, maybe that's why he ended up there, working there. I don't know. It was at Hilltop, right? So that's where he worked with the milk. And Gene can tell you story after story of him working out there. I know once he told me about his septic. He had to do something with his septic system. And so I'm thinking, oh, you brought in an excavator, brought in something. Nope, he says, I dug it myself. And he went out there and just kept working. If you ever go by and he's out there working on his driveway, trying to get it just right before winter. The Bible says to work and to enjoy the fruit of your labor. And Wilbur did that. He went to heaven doing what he loved to do, right next to a mower. And I don't think he would have it any other way. I think if he had to choose, he would have chose right there. Last Sunday, he nodded his head as I spoke about. I spoke on suffer the little children to come unto me. And I talked about how we had just had VBS and the kids came in. And of course, they break things, they tear things up. They leave food on the floor, they leave wrappers on the floor. But as I talked about why do we need to suffer the little children. One of those was because the aging of the church. And like I did, I always kind of joked around and looked at Wilbur. And Wilbur nodded his head. But what he had just done is he had just made for VBS, he made these little plaques for VBS. Because he knew little children would take his place one day. Mhm.
I do wanna say something because he went and got the, board for it, and he made up all of them. And then he wasn't happy with them because some of them, they warped. So we went back to Lowe's, and we bought more of the plywood, and he cut them all back out again, and sanded them off, because, well, he was working for the Lord, you know?
It wasn't right.
Yeah, he was gonna do it right, so.
Wilbur wasn't afraid to work.
No.